Story title: The Shadow in the Alley. On a cold wintry night when the wind howled between the old buildings and the trees shivered under its force, Nadia walked alone down the dark alley. Heavy footsteps echoed behind her, and she felt her breath quicken as the darkness around her thickened. She took a hesitant step forward, feeling a chill seep from her heart, planting seeds of fear deep in her soul. She whispered to herself, maybe it's just night illusions, or perhaps fatigue-induced hallucinations. But her sense of danger only grew stronger. With every step forward, the footsteps behind her grew louder, resonating more ominously in her mind. Suddenly, Nadia stopped and turned her head to see who was behind her, but the alley was empty. Still, the feeling of mysterious eyes watching her from an unseen place remained. Would you like me to continue developing this part and gradually advance the story with you? Nadia cautiously continued her steps, each one increasing her heartbeat. Just when she felt a slight sense of security, a strange shadow appeared on the wall facing her. It was large, without distinct features, yet its form hinted at something unnatural lurking behind her. Frozen in place, Nadia tried to steady her nerves and murmured in a soft voice, "Who are you? And what do you want?" No answer came. But the shadow seemed to be moving slowly toward her, wrapping itself around the alley walls, enclosing her and steadily shrinking the space. Nadia decided to run, but just as she turned forward to flee, she heard a faint whisper close to her ear, a cold whisper, like the sound of wind from another realm. The voice said, "There's no escape. This is your only exit and your last." Her heart pounded harder, and she felt on the verge of fainting from fear. But she gathered what remained of her strength and started running down the alley, her footsteps racing against death itself. She didn't look back, but she could feel the shadow still chasing her, inching closer in a terrifying manner. The shadow's hands stretched out like dark wraiths, touching the walls and scratching the ground. Strange sounds echoed in her ears, sorrowful cries, muffled screams, and whispers beyond comprehension. Then, in a terrifying moment, Nadia stumbled and fell to the ground. She tried to get up, but her legs were trembling with fear. She felt a cold touch on her shoulder, freezing her in place as she slowly looked toward the source of the touch. There in front of her, stood the apparition of a woman with faint features, her eyes burning a pale red, and her hair hanging like spider silk. The woman stared at Nadia with hollow eyes and in a quiet, eerie voice said, "Why have you come here? This place is not only for the dead, but for the living too." Nadia cried out in desperation, "Please let me go. I didn't know this place existed." But the apparition smiled a cold, terrifying smile and replied in a voice echoing from the depths of a well, "You cannot leave until you see what happened here. Until you know the truth." Then suddenly the apparition vanished, but the alley was no longer the same. Everything around Nadia had changed. It seemed as though she had traveled back to another time, where the buildings were old and dilapidated, and fog covered every corner. Nadia looked around, her eyes darting nervously between the old buildings with their broken windows and cracked walls, as if they had borne witness to long harrowing tales of horror and pain. She tried to steady herself, but her trembling hand reached for a nearby wall to support herself, as though trying to ground her existence in a place that felt utterly unreal. Then she heard distant sounds, like the whispers of a group speaking in a haunting murmur. She strained to make out their words, but could only catch scattered phrases, with one word ringing clearly, "Revenge, revenge." The whispers grew louder, becoming a mournful wail, as if every soul in that alley was groaning and crying out for justice. At that moment, an old wooden door beside her creaked open, and an old man stepped out, dressed in tattered clothes and bearing a face marked by the pallor of death. In a grave tone, he gazed at Nadia with sorrowful, pity-filled eyes and said, "You've come to the wrong place, my child. This alley does not let anyone leave unscathed." Nadia gasped and stammered, "Please, I only want to get out of here." The old man offered a faint, eerie smile and replied, "To leave? There's no leaving here until you understand the secret of this alley, until you help us find peace." She looked at him, stunned, feeling fear encircling her from all sides, and asked, "What happened here?" The old man gestured toward a dusty ancient wall and said, "Look, this wall tells the story." Nadia stepped forward slowly toward the wall, and as she touched it, a cold current surged through her body. Suddenly, She began to see images unfolding before her eyes as if they were scenes from a distant past. She watched the scenes play out like memories from a time long ago. She saw people walking down this same alley, some carrying bags, while others appeared to have just come out of a battle, covered in blood and exhaustion. Their eyes seemed to look straight at Nadia from the images, as if they were silently entrusting her with the burden of their stories. In one scene, a young man appeared, dressed in old-fashioned but elegant clothes, holding the hand of a pale-faced woman filled with sorrow. They spoke in inaudible words, yet it seemed the woman was pleading with him about something. Suddenly, the man's expression shifted from compassion to rage, then to cold cruelty. He seized the woman and shoved her against a nearby wall, the echo of her impact ringing painfully in Nadia's ears. Nadia watched in horrified awe, her eyes wide, until she found herself back in the present. The wall in front of her was once again a mere wall, but now it seemed to scream with pain and injustice. In a trembling, hushed voice, Nadia asked the old man, "These souls, how can I help them?" The old man replied with a sorrowful tone, "You must finish what that man began. These souls cannot leave until they are freed from hatred and vengeance. They have been trapped here because of a betrayal, a wound that was never healed." Nadia whispered in fear, "But how can I do that?" The old man pointed to the deep darkness at the end of the alley and said, "You must go to the end of the alley, to the old door. Behind it lies a buried secret, and a soul that has found no rest for hundreds of years." With heavy, reluctant steps, Nadia moved toward the darkness, as if the ground itself was trying to hold her back, preventing her from advancing. As Nadia made her way through the darkness toward the end of the alley, the old door seemed like a relic of a mysterious past, crafted from cracked wood, surrounded by rust, and engulfed in shadow. She approached the door cautiously, her trembling hand reaching out to push it, and as soon as she touched it, the door creaked open with a chilling groan. Inside the room beyond the door, a faint, ghostly light barely illuminated a small area. The room was empty except for a large old mirror covering the opposite wall, beside which stood a small, closed chest. Nadia felt the presence of something unseen in the space, as though the spirits she had seen earlier were hovering around her. She approached the mirror carefully, staring at her reflection, but it wasn't the way she remembered. In the mirror, she saw her face pale and her eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. Suddenly, her reflection began to change slowly, morphing until she no longer saw herself. Instead, she saw the woman from her earlier vision, the same sad face and despairing eyes. The woman in the mirror spoke in a sorrowful tone, "You're seeing my story now, aren't you?" Nadia replied in a trembling voice, "What happened to you? Why are you here?" The woman's voice came out choked, as though she were sharing a deeply buried secret. "I loved, and that love was my sin. He betrayed me, and buried me behind these walls, where no one could hear my screams, where no one knew I existed." Nadia felt a wave of shock but was determined to help the tormented spirit, so she asked, "How can I set you free?" The woman pointed to the small chest beside the mirror and said, "Inside this chest, you'll find the tool he used to kill me. The tool that can finally end this suffering." With trembling hands, Nadia took hold of the small chest and opened it slowly. Inside lay an ancient dagger, its hilt stained with faint traces of dried blood, as though time itself had failed to erase the evidence of the crime. Nadia felt an eerie chill in her hand, as though the dagger carried the weight of a dark past. The woman in the mirror spoke again, her voice heavy with regret and pain, "This is the dagger that ended my life. You must take it and place it where my bones are hidden, so my soul can finally be freed from this prison." Nadia hesitated for a moment, but she understood that what she was doing was the only way to end the curse that haunted her. She looked around and asked the woman, "Where do I find that place?" The woman pointed to a dark corner of the room and said, "There, beneath the ground, you'll find the entrance to the cellar where I was buried without mercy." Nadia approached the dark corner and noticed a large stone that seemed to be hiding a hidden entrance. She pushed it aside with effort, revealing a small opening leading down into a pitch-black passage. Taking a deep breath, Nadia descended into the narrow corridor, holding the dagger in one hand and carrying a heart weighed down by fear and hope for release. The deeper Nadia went into the cellar, the colder it grew, and she began to hear faint sounds echoing in the darkness, as though the trapped souls were expressing their gratitude for what she was doing for them. Finally, Nadia reached a spacious room at the end of the corridor, covered in dust and dirt. In the center of the room lay a small pit, almost like an abandoned grave. Nadia felt certain this was the place the woman had mentioned, the spot where her bones had been buried. Nadia cautiously approached the pit, placed the dagger inside, and immediately felt a chill sweep through the room. A pale light glowed around the pit, and before Nadia appeared the image of the woman from the mirror, this time surrounded by an aura of peace. The woman smiled and said in a grateful tone, "You have set me free. At last, I can leave this place." As Nadia watched in awe, the woman's image began to fade slowly, but before vanishing entirely, she whispered, "Be careful, Nadia, for the darkness here holds many secrets, ones that may emerge if you leave the alley without seeing everything." The light faded, and the room returned to darkness, but something in the air felt different. Nadia sensed a lightness in the space, as though the heavy weight that had trapped her had lifted. However, the woman's final words lingered in her mind. Nadia began to make her way back toward the exit of the cellar, but she noticed a small door in one corner of the room that hadn't been there before. She hesitated for a moment, then decided to approach it and slowly opened it. As Nadia wandered through the alley, she felt a different sensation, as if life had returned to the place. But deep in her heart, she realized that the past would not be easily forgotten, and the lessons she learned would stay with her forever. She took a deep breath and headed toward the spot where she had witnessed those horrors. There were some faint lights twinkling in the alley, and she began to feel something strange. There was something still connecting her to the past, something reminding her of the stories she had heard about, and those souls that had been brought back to peace. But she was determined not to let herself fall into the trap of fear again. She decided to record everything that had happened, to document the entire story, so that it could serve as a lesson for future generations and remind everyone that darkness cannot dominate life as long as there are those who seek justice. She sat on the pavement in the alley and began to write everything she had experienced, all the emotions and events, and every detail that had led to the liberation of those souls. As she wrote, she felt as if the words were flowing from her like a river, as if she was surrounded by the presence of those liberated souls, encouraging and supporting her. Over time, Nadia decided to share her story, to tell people what had happened in that alley, and how good can triumph over evil. She organized an event at a local cultural center, where she invited everyone to listen to her story and the story of those oppressed souls. When people came and listened, their hearts were touched by Nadia's journey, and they began to feel a responsibility to protect places that carry painful memories, and to honor the souls that seek justice. Her story became an inspiration for many, and campaigns were launched to raise awareness about the importance of respecting memory and not forgetting what happened in the past. As the days passed, the alley began to transform into a place to celebrate life, instead of being a symbol of darkness. Local authorities revitalized the area, and small statues were erected to honor the suffering souls, and people started coming from all around to visit the alley and celebrate the lives of those who had passed. Nadia felt peace in her heart, having fulfilled her mission to make a difference. With every visitor who came to honor the memory of those lost, she felt that some of the darkness had lifted, and that light had returned to a place once considered a refuge for fear. In that moment, Nadia realized that she no longer feared the darkness, but had learned that light only shines when we confront darkness with courage and faith. Nadia took it upon herself to preserve the alley as a symbol of hope and justice. She began organizing regular workshops to teach people how to confront their fears and how storytelling can heal old wounds. She realized that many people carried similar stories in their hearts, painful experiences yet to be told. The idea of creating a support group for those who had suffered pain or injustice developed, and the alley became a place where everyone gathered to share their stories, discuss their experiences, and support each other on their journey toward healing. She organized discussion sessions and seminars where survivor victims spoke about their experiences, raising awareness about important issues such as abuse, injustice, and loss of identity. Years passed, and Nadia transformed from a frightened victim into a brave leader who inspired others. When she spoke in front of crowds, her eyes sparkled with determination and passion. She always said, "Courage is not the absence of fear but the ability to move forward despite that fear. When we confront our past, we find the strength to heal." One day, while she was speaking at a discussion session, a participant suggested the idea of documenting the experiences of people who had lived in the alley. It was a brilliant idea, so she formed a small team of volunteers to collect the stories. They began researching, writing, and documenting the experiences of those affected by past events. The resulting book was a collection of true stories that ranged from hope to despair, strength to weakness. The book represented the lost voices, freeing tortured souls from the grip of silence. On the launch day, friends, family, and community members gathered in the alley. There were moments of reflection and insight, where the book was presented, and some stories were read aloud. When Nadia finished reading one of the moving stories, everyone felt tears of joy and sadness filling their eyes. That moment became a symbol of connection and recovery. Nadia embraced everyone's hearts as they exchanged stories and memories. They all knew that the alley was no longer just a dark place, it had transformed into a space for recovery, healing, and peace. Over time, the alley witnessed an even greater transformation, hosting art exhibitions, musical performances, and becoming a hub for culture and the arts. Events were organized to honor the suffering souls and to emphasize the importance of awareness and community in promoting justice. Nadia, who had suffered pain, found herself now as a beacon of hope. She had transformed her personal story into something larger, inspiring many to be part of the solution and face their fears together. As the days went by, the alley was not just a place in the city, it became a symbol of hope, witnessing hope bloom in places once considered dark. Nadia walked through the alley, smiling, knowing that she had contributed to changing the world around her and that darkness could not hide the light if hope was given a chance to grow.